All right, well, I think we're good to start. So again, thank you all for joining us. For those of you that don't know, Responsible Pennsylvania is a newly formed coalition with the goal to help and support the legalization of adult use cannabis in 2024. Our coalition is composed of patient advocates, doctors, scientists, researchers, laboratories, economic development groups, members of law enforcement, local elected officials, and civil and social equity community organizations from across the state. Now, with 90% of Pennsylvania's neighboring states already legalizing cannabis and a robust medical operation in the state for nearly a decade, the Responsible PA Coalition believes that now is the time to legalize cannabis. Time is also now to create a solid social equity structure in Pennsylvania to be prepared for cannabis legalization. Our coalition is nonpartisan and agnostic about what party, what chamber, and what bill is passed, so long as it creates a responsible, regulated adult use market that's accessible throughout the Commonwealth on day one. Now, to get an idea of what the impact of that market would be, we commissioned a robust economic report from FTI Consulting. And in a moment, I'll hand it over to the analyst to walk us through the anticipated tax revenue, job prognosis, and more. Following the presentation, we'll happily take questions. If you have any questions that come up through the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So thank you everybody for joining us, and I'm going to kick it over to Brendan now.
Good morning, everyone. Let me just get my screen shared here. Second.
That
All
looks
right, great. Thank you. So to begin, just a little bit about FTI. FTI is a global business advisory firm. Within FTI's economic consulting segment is its economic impacts group. EIG is a functional group that answers what-if questions on economic impacts and public policy. FTI is also one of the first major US-based business advisory firms to establish a cannabis-specific practice. We offer services such as business valuation, dispute advisory services, strategic communication, and public relations, among others. So just to give the highlights of the report, Responsible Pennsylvania engaged FTI to conduct an economic impact analysis of the potential adult use cannabis market in Pennsylvania. What we did here was we modeled 3 scenarios based on historical relationships between retail, medical, and adult use sales in other states. So we have 3 cases: a base case, which represents a $2.1 billion adult use market, a low case, which represents a $1.7 billion adult use market, and a high case, which represents 2. Here we use the in-plan model, which is known as an economic input-output model. It has nearly 550 sectors customized to the state of Pennsylvania to project the economic impacts in Pennsylvania under each scenario. The in-plan model accounts for the total supply chain impacts of cannabis legalization. So what we found was that between the low and the high case, we could support between 26,250 jobs and nearly 45,000 jobs within the first full year of a legal adult use market, with the base case supporting an estimated 33,350 jobs in the state. This would lead to an additional $4.2 billion in economic output and nearly $2.6 billion in state GDP in Pennsylvania. Additionally, adult use legalization would generate $126 million in new state sales taxes and $212 million in state wholesale cannabis excise taxes. So here's just a brief look at the breakdown of jobs that would be directly, indirectly supported and then induced jobs. I'll get into that more later. But what we're essentially showing here is that out of the 33,350 jobs, 22,290 would be directly supported by the adult use market. So a little bit on the methodology. So we collected retail and medical adult use sales data from Arizona, Illinois, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, and calculated the ratio between medical to adult use sales in the first full year of adult use sales. So Arizona and Illinois had significantly lower multipliers than Massachusetts and New Jersey. So similarities between the Arizona, Illinois, and Pennsylvania's regulatory environments led to our base case, which was an average of a 1.8x multiplier. So essentially what we're saying is in the first year of adult use sales would be 1.8 times higher than medical sales. We also evaluated the low case using a 1.4x multiplier and a high case using a 2.4x multiplier, which was the average of those 4 states. So given that 2023 medical sales of 1.2 billion in Pennsylvania, the base case adult use market was projected at 2.1 billion. What we did was then assume a 33% retail margin, representing nearly $700 million in retail marginal revenue and $1.4 billion in wholesale sales. We distributed this output across administration, manufacturing, management, cultivation, and distribution jobs. Uh, we mapped these to the appropriate sectors in the in-plan model, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. And we used this to estimate the direct, indirect, and induced economic outputs of the base case adult use market. We repeated this methodology for the other cases to form a range of potential impacts. We assumed a 6% sales tax on retail sales and a 15% cannabis excise tax on wholesale sales. So a little bit about the in-plan model. So this is a widely used model. It's used by state and federal agencies, trade associations, advocacy groups, et cetera. What it does is it estimates the indirect and induced effects from the results from a direct economic activity. So in the example here, you build a new factory, it creates jobs, it increases local spending, but then that factory has upstream suppliers who they need to source inputs from. And then as a result, jobs are supported in the supply chain. Then those jobs that are supported in the supply chain and those original direct jobs, those workers, they need to buy groceries, they go to sporting events, they go to restaurants, they support jobs in their local communities. Those are what are known as induced effects. So in-plan produces six main metrics, which are employment, output, GDP, labor income, state and local tax revenues, and federal tax revenues. So we supplemented the state and local tax revenues that in-plan generate with that 6% sales tax and that 15% excise tax that we discussed. So here are the results of the base case. First, some general assumptions. As I mentioned, it's driven by a 1.8x multiplier. So that leads to a $2.1 billion adult use retail sales market. Let's skip ahead here.